Study Session 15, Urban Public Transportation Policy. Introduction. In this lecture, discussion shall be on issues relating to urban transportation policy with special reference to Nigeria. To do this effectively, I shall begin by examining the concept of urban transportation and then move to discuss the history of transportation, types of public transportation, as well as development of public transportation policy in Nigeria. Objectives. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to 1. Discuss the history of transportation in urban centers. 2. Examine various types of public transportation. 3. Discuss the development of public transportation in Nigeria. And 4. Highlight the issues that should guide legislation on public transportation in Nigeria. Pretext. 1. Carefully trace the history of transportation in urban centers. 2. Discuss various types of public transportation. 3. Discuss the development of public transportation you know of. 4. Identify and examine the issues that should guide the formulation of legislation on public transportation in Nigeria. Transportation is one of the most essential social services in any country, and that explains why various countries have adopted policies and legislation to guide it. Transportation policy means many various things to different people. It may mean a continuous search for the elusive balanced transportation concept. Transportation policy may also mean seeing to it that highways and roads keep on getting the largest share of federal, state, and local government funds available for transportation improvements. Transportation policy may also mean traffic engineering and improved public transportation facilities that will revitalize a given area and help business to pick up. Also, those who use public transportation have a different perspective about urban transportation policy. For them, transportation policy is likely to mean not a policy, but a confusing mix of incompatible bureaucratic statements, activities, and behaviors that have led to high fares, poor service, decrepit equipment, to mention a few. They may feel that no one really cares about the public transportation consumers and the problem they face. In Nigeria, the confusing nature of transportation policy is highlighted by the fact that each of the definitions that we have attempted is partly correct. The conflict that arises out of these definitions shows the very low status of public transportation in Nigeria, not only in unattractiveness and efficiency, but also in the terms of the level of use. Public transportation in Nigeria is beset by a myriad of problems and shortcomings that arise out of controversies and crises over service delivery. Beyond this, the transportation industry contains a unique mix or blend of interests, actors, issues, and problems that make public transportation in Nigeria an interesting case study. In this chapter, we will use the issue of public transportation, both the making of policy and the delivery of services, to illustrate many of the themes we have already developed. But first, let us look at urban public transportation. Urban public transportation can be defined as transportation service that is available to the general public and that carries passengers to destinations for a fee. Public transportation is also known as mass transportation or mass transit, since many people use it to travel to common destinations. Although many different types of public transportation system exist, They can be classified into two: common carriers and contract carriers. Common carriers are usually operated by city or regional government agencies and are open to all members of the public willing to pay the posted fare. Common carrier systems include transportation systems generally run along established routes within a city or metropolitan area, allowing people to travel without using an automobile or other mode of personal transportation. Contract carriers are privately run operations that people hire for a single trip to a given destination. Examples are taxi cabs, rental cars, and chartered buses. Contract carriers, which are more expensive than common carriers, can travel to places where bus or subway service may not reach and can operate at times when common carrier service may not be scheduled. Public transportation is usually found in large cities and in densely populated areas. Large cities maintain public transportation services because they often have more traffic congestion and fewer parking spaces than smaller towns have. Public transportation reduces the number of vehicles on the road, and it is a convenient option for people traveling relatively short distances. Public transportation systems are more widespread in other cities because these cities established systems before automobile use was common. Older cities tend to be more densely populated, making public transportation a more attractive option than using personal vehicles. Business districts with high concentrations of employment also use public transportation. Lagos, Ibadan, and Kaduna are all older cities with large business districts, and all these cities have extensive public transportation networks. Public transportation provides an efficient and inexpensive means of transportation for millions of people, but it faces strong competition from the automobile, which offers more flexibility for travelers. Public transportation systems outside Nigeria tend to be more developed because of the age of the cities, higher population densities, and the greater willingness of governments to spend money on them. Rail systems in particular are more popular in Europe, Asia, and the United States than in Nigeria. History of population. Modern public transportation systems originated in Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries. Horse-drawn carriages provided for higher transportation between major towns in Europe, but the service was erratic and slow. The hackney carriage, small horse-drawn coach, was used within large cities. It resembled the modern taxi cab in terms of service and operation. Eventually, large wagons such as stagecoaches were used to carry passengers along established routes within a city, and in 1819, regular service routes were operational in Paris. A similar service began in New York City in 1827. The stagecoach was followed by the omnibus, a horse-drawn wagon designed for efficiently transporting several passengers over short distances. George Schilliber, an enterprising coach builder, built the first omnibus for use in Paris, and he eventually started an omnibus line in London in 1829. In 1832, horse-drawn streetcars were introduced in New York City. These streetcars resembled omnibuses but ran on iron rails in the street rather than on wagon wheels. The rails reduced friction considerably, allowing horses to pull the rail cars more easily than regular wagons could be pulled. The more efficient streetcar gradually began to replace the omnibus in many cities. By the 1860s, most U.S. cities had horse or mule-powered street railways franchised by the city. Another type of propulsion for streetcars came from Andrew Halliday, who devised a cable system that ran along the length of track. Streetcars gripping the cable were pulled along. The first successful cable car system was opened in San Francisco in 1873. Cable cars could reach speeds of 21 km per hour, 13 miles per hour, and did not require the use of horses. Horses were reliable, but they produced large amounts of waste, which usually lay in the street, and the horses were often subject to diseases. Cable cars and cable car systems were popular, both because of the tourist appeal of this system and because of its ability to operate on steep grades. Modern methods of transportation were introduced into Nigeria by the British colonialists. Before the encounter of the natives with the Europeans, transportation on land was achieved on the backs of certain beasts of burden, horses, camels, and donkeys. These means of transportation were extremely slow and difficult to maintain, and typically only the rich could afford to own these. Thus, the majority of people who had not the means to acquire or maintain these animals commuted solely on foot. The first modern means of transportation introduced in Nigeria was the bicycle, which natives at that time called iron horse. However, with significant development in the automobile industry in Europe and America, cars, buses, and trains were introduced, and these have remained with us till date. Nigeria has 194,394 kilometers or 120,079 miles of roads. Most Nigerians travel by bus or taxi, both between and within cities. During the 1970s and 1980s, federal and state governments built and upgraded numerous expressways and trans-regional trunk roads. State governments also upgraded smaller roads, which helped open rural areas to development. However, by the mid-1990s, lack of investment had left most of the roads to deteriorate. Nigeria has 3,505 kilometers or 2,178 miles of operated railway track. The main line, completed in 1911, links Lagos to Kano, with extensions from Kano to Nguru, from Zaria to Kaura, Namoda, and from Minna to Baro. The use of railways, both for passengers and freight traffic, has declined due to competition from the road network. Nigeria's largest ocean ports are at Lagos, Apapa and Tin Can Island, Port Harcourt, Calabar, Sapele, and Warri. The main petroleum exporting facilities are at Bonny and Burutu. Transportation along inland waterways, especially the Niger and Benue rivers, was very important during the colonial era. In the late 1980s, the government upgraded river ports at Onitsha, Ajaokuta, Lokoja, Baro, Jeba, and Yelwa. Locks have been constructed at Kainji Dam to facilitate navigation. Rivers transport is used mainly for shipping goods. Nigeria has two major international airports, one in the Lagos suburb of Ikeja and the other in Kano. Internal flights serves the majority of state capitals, of which Kaduna, Port Harcourt, and Enugu are the busiest. Nigeria Airways, the national carrier, offers both domestic and international flights. Several small regional carriers also compete for domestic traffic. Types of public transportation. Public transportation system differs in the type of right-of-way each system has and the technology each uses. These factors help determine the speed of a system where it is able to operate and how often vehicles in the system travel along various routes. Right-of-way refers in the physical part that a transportation system follows. If a system has a fully controlled right-of-way, then the system does not have to yield to other transportation systems and can move more rapidly. Subways have a fully controlled right-of-way because they run on rails dedicated solely to subway use. Therefore, subways can operate safely at high speeds. Buses must share the right-of-way with other motor vehicles on the road, and consequently, buses move more slowly. Some rail systems, such as light rail, may have a semi-exclusive right-of-way. They may share the right-of-way with motor vehicle traffic for part of the journey, then shift to a fully controlled right-of-way, such as an elevated rail track or a tunnel, for the remainder of the trip. A fully controlled right-of-way provides the best of performance for a transportation system, but this is also financially costly to construct. Sharing the right-of-way with other systems is cheaper, but service can suffer because of traffic or other problems. The mechanical feature of the vehicle and the riding surface of a public transportation system constitute the technology of the system. Technologies differ in cost, flexibility, and speed of travel. For instance, buses generally use diesel fuel and travel on the same streets as cars and trucks do. Rail system may use electric motors or diesel locomotives for propulsion, but are limited to traveling on steel track rails. Bus technology is more flexible than rail systems, and bus routes can be easily changed to accommodate changing ridership. Rail technology is generally faster than motor vehicle technology, but is also more expensive to purchase and operate. The most common types of public transportation are bus, paratransit, streetcar, light rail, commuter rail, automated guided transit, and ferry. Number 1. Buses. Bus service operates diesel or electric buses along defined routes and according to published schedules. Buses vary in size from minibuses to keke or danfo, which can carry up to 14 passengers, and this is more common in Nigerian cities, up to multi-section articulated buses, which have an extra passenger unit attached by means of a flexible joint. Articulated buses can carry as many as 130 passengers and are common in the advanced societies of Europe and America. Buses operate on both city streets and highways. Some streets and highways have special lanes reserved only for buses transit, thus increasing the speed and efficiency of bus travel. Trolley buses are electrically powered buses that use electricity from overhead wires mounted along city streets. The use of electric power reduces pollution, noise, and the need for refueling, but this also limits the routes trolley buses can take. Number 2. Paratransit. Paratransit includes taxi cabs, jeepneys, and dial-a-ride services. It provides short-distance transportation for small groups of passengers. A taxi cab is an automobile operated by a driver and hired by users for an individual trip. Taxi cabs have the highest out-of-pocket cost of all types of public transportation, but taxi cab service is closest in convenience to the private automobile. Taxi cabs are the most common transport vehicle available in Nigerian cities. Jeepneys are privately owned large cars or vans that usually operate on fixed routes but without fixed schedules. Jeepneys are a flexible means of public transportation, although they also tend to add to traffic congestion. Dial-a-ride services consist of minibuses or vans that are directed from a central dispatching office as the service is requested. The dispatcher plans the route so that as many passengers as possible are served on a single trip. Dial-a-ride services are slower and less direct than taxicabs, but generally are cheaper as well. Number 3. Streetcars. Streetcars, also known as tramways or trolleys, are electrically powered vehicles that run on steel tracks embedded within city streets. Power for these electric vehicles is received from overhead wires, as in the case of trolley buses. Streetcars can operate as single units or in short trains of 2 or 3 cars. Streetcars often have to contend with traffic, usually resulting in slow service. A cable car is a type of streetcar that is pulled along by a cable running under the street. The only remaining cable car system in operation in the United States is in San Francisco, California. Number 4. Light rail transit. Light rail transit is an electric railway system that evolved from streetcar systems. Like streetcars, light rail cars operate as single units or as short trains of 2 or 3 cars. Light rail is designed to use a variety of rights of way, providing more flexibility than the streetcar. In some cities, light rail systems operate like streetcars in downtown areas, but then move to reserved lanes of traffic service in outer neighborhoods. Light rail systems may also operate in tunnels, under congested areas, or on elevated tracks mounted over city streets. Light rail is popular in Europe and is in use in several US cities, including Portland, Oregon, San Diego, California, and Baltimore, as well as Maryland. Light rail is a cheaper and more versatile alternative to older rail systems. Number 5. Heavy rail transit. Heavy rail systems are also commonly referred to as rapid transit. Subways, often called metros, are common examples, although rail rapid transit system may also operate above ground as part of the New York City and Chicago, Illinois subway systems do. Heavy rail systems typically consist of large 4-axle rail vehicles operating in trains of 2 to 10 cars. Rail rapid transit systems operate on tracks reserved solely for the rail cars, and so the trains are able to travel at high speeds. Some rail rapid transit systems, such as BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, in the US, for example, are highly automated. Power for rail rapid transit vehicles is usually supplied by an electrified third rail mounted alongside the train tracks. Some heavy rail systems use rubber tires rather than steel wheels. These tires produce a quieter sound but create more friction, which reduces efficiency. A monorail is a special type of heavy rail system that uses a single rail to support and guide the vehicles. A monorail that was built for the 1962 World's Fair in Seattle, Washington, connects the downtown to the nearby fairgrounds and is still in use. Monorails have also been built for circular routes around airports or at amusement parks, such as Walt Disney World, but they have not been widely used for urban transportation. Number 6. Commuter rail transit. Commuter rail transit uses traditional freight railroad technology, including diesel or electric locomotives, to operate trains for passenger service. Commuter rail systems generally operate during peak hours, transporting workers between down areas of major cities and nearby suburbs. The rail lines used by a commuter rail system may have been abandoned for freight service or may be operated for freight use during non-commuter times. Number 7. Automated guided transit. Automated guided transit systems, also known as people movers, are fully automated transit systems which operate with no crew. These systems vary widely in design and are less common than bus and rail systems. Automated guided transit is a popular method at large airports for transporting passengers short distances between terminals. Some designs are essentially automated buses running on guided routes, while some others run on rails. The vehicles may be operated individually or in small trains. Number 8. Ferries. Ferries are often used in cities with rivers, lakes, or other bodies of water that pose obstacles to transportation. Ferry technology includes ferry boats and, to a lesser extent, hovercraft and hydrofoils. Ferry buses are used to carry people and often motor vehicles over short distances. Sizes of ferry buses vary from small boats that can hold a few passengers to large vessels that can carry as many as 200 automobiles and 2,500 passengers. A hovercraft rides on a cushion of air created by air pressure underneath a specially designed skirt. Large hovercrafts are popular means of crossing the English Channel between France and England. Hydrofoils are large boats with submerged fins or foils. As the speed of a hydrofoil increases, its hull rises out of the water and the boat rides on the foils. Because less of the vessel is in the water, resulting in less resistance to the motion of the hydrofoil, it can reach much higher speeds than a regular boat. Development of public transportation in Nigeria. Public transportation in Nigeria evolved gradually, and general control of these systems has alternated over time between private and government. Soon after independence, the government operated most public transportation systems in Nigeria. The government also provided and enforced regulations relating to transportation. The government would also award exclusive operating franchises to streetcars and bus companies. In return, these monopolies would commit to maintain service and fare levels. This arrangement changed shortly after in response to a number of factors. Automobile ownership grew steadily throughout the early part of the century and provided strong competition to public transportation. In the late 1960s and 1970s, the Civil War and the economic difficulties experienced as a result of governmental irresponsibility, wastages, and corruption, and military dictatorships created problems. Transport companies began to lose money. Service on many routes was eliminated, and eventually the companies gave up their financial participation. In the 1980s, a period of expanded automobile ownership, combined with the rapid growth of suburban communities, prompted another decline in public transportation use. To counter this decline and salvage the existing public transportation shifted to the federal, state, and local government, as well as to special governmental agencies such as the Labor Mass Transit Authorities. They increase costs as well as public subsidies in order to maintain the transit systems. Government support continues to be an important source of funds for public transportation. By the end of the 1990s, over half of the funding for public transportation systems operating in Nigeria was being supplied by the federal government. Public transportation agencies raised about a quarter of the needed money from taxes, tolls, and state and local governments provided the rest. Public transportation planning is a complicated task, especially since over the years, many systems have evolved and grown beyond their original designs. New additions to transportation systems are expensive, and building these additions is often disruptive to existing roads or city structures. Each new system must be carefully planned. Population, employment density, prospects for growth, per capita income, car ownership, and ultimate costs are just some of the factors that must be considered when planning public transportation systems. Planners of bus service, for example, must take into account numerous factors, such as past operating practices and procedures, coverage of the current system, local fare prices, land use, population density, employment density, street patterns, and availability of off-street rail transit. Planning of rail transit is more complex because of the large number of options and the higher costs involved. Key factors include maximization of ridership, efficiency of operations, potential to foster new residential and commercial developments, and cost of construction. No simple formula can determine where a system should be built. The issue of national transportation policy in Nigeria. Proponents of mass transportation have consistently emphasized the absence at the federal level of any comprehensive, consistent, and coherent statement concerning what the Nigerian posture towards urban mass transit is or ought to be. Many of these proponents accuse government of adopting a piecemeal approach to the issue of urban public transportation. They accuse the government of playing politics with the issue of transportation and a general lack of prioritization of policy that continues to undermine our development. If what these advocates are seeking is a simple, relatively fixed statement or set of decisions that will once and for all define the goals and objectives of urban transportation in Nigeria, then they are bound to be disappointed. Such a simple statement in whatever form is never likely to emerge from government. The preference of our government, past and present, is an amalgam of approaches that attempt to respond to a given set of pressures or crises that often work at cross purposes. The government frequently makes decisions, takes actions, spends money, builds roads, bridges, and systems without first determining exactly what the purpose of an urban transportation system ought to be. The federal effort consists of a long and expensive series of programs: construction of interstate highways, Federal Ministry of Works and Housing and transportation-sponsored researches, development, demonstration and technical studies, etc. The net result is that there is no policy but a set of compartmentalized and haphazard policies developed at different times, at different levels of public responsibility, by different interests and actors concerned with different issues and outcomes, interested in different modes of travel, and administered by different techniques. In spite of the billions of naira spent on public transportation in the military years, only about 2% of daily trips in Nigeria are made by public transportation. This 2% includes interstate and intercity transportation. If these journeys were excluded from the calculation, public transportation will be less than 2% of the daily travel of Nigerian citizens. In conclusion, even if the government decides to spend more money on public transportation, the future of public transportation remains clouded. The absence of a dependable and goal-oriented government policy on public transportation has sprung wide-scale social disaffection among the people. Most people do see public transportation as non-functional. Also, because of the general lack of a maintenance culture, the available public transportations are dilapidated. Consequently, many people who otherwise would have used public transportation do not believe that they are dependable, comfortable, or attractive. When the public buses are available at all, they are likely to come late, may not have fixed routes, and may be overcrowded, forcing many commuters to stand or sit on attached seats for all or part of their journey. In addition, the seating arrangement in these buses is uncomfortable because it is not very spacious. Consequently, for most commuters, public transportation should be avoided like hell. Because of the problems of public transportation in Nigeria, which are themselves occasioned by a lack of a comprehensive national policy on transportation, public transportation has become unattractive for most passengers. Because of the hazards, health and otherwise, of public transportation, people willingly wait and save for years to get their own cars. They enthusiastically flock to the expressways at an average of 5 or 6 passengers per automobile and patiently wait at fuel stations for hours to pay high black market prices to get fuel at any rate. They willingly and regularly endure commuter traffic problems and very bad stretches of road, but they are unwilling to take public transportation that frequently experience breakdowns or experience being transferred from one bus to another to complete their journey, or accept any of the inconveniences associated with using mass transportation. The transportation policy that exists today is a patchwork of decades of arbitrary decisions that the biases and values of those who occupy government positions in Nigeria influence. The net effect has been a consistent policy that favors the movement of vehicles or automobiles over the movement of people and goods, with the result that Nigerians must provide their own means of transportation most of the time. For the wealthy Nigerian family that has an average of 3 automobiles at its disposal, such transportation policy has a little impact on them. However, for many Nigerians that cannot afford to purchase a single car, such transportation policy is disheartening. Study session summary. In this lecture, we have discussed issues relating to urban transportation policy with special reference to Nigeria. This lecture discussed the concept of urban transportation as well as its history. Furthermore, in discussing types of public transportation, special attention was paid to bus services, paratransit, streetcars, light rail transit, heavy rail transit, commuter rail transit, automated guided transit, and ferries. We also examined issues of the development of public transportation policy in Nigeria, as well as critical matters involved. With that, we have come to the end of study session 15 and the end of SOW206 lecture. Thank you for listening.